Now, I just want to remind you as well that Rachel Reeves has in fact got a background in economics. Have a look.
Well, I'm an economist. I studied economics. I got a master's in economics from the London School of Economics, and I worked as an economist at the Bank of England.
Sorry. Oh, dear. Peter Hitchens is here. Peter, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Just in case you didn't know, apparently Rachel Reeves has got a degree in economics from the London School of Economics, and she is, in fact, an economist.
Well, indeed, I think she has studied economics, but I think some of the other claims made don't wholly and totally stand up, do they?
They don't really, considering the mess the budget appears to have got the economy in. She's not a very good economist.
An economist could have got the country into a mess, but how much of an economist she actually is, I don't know. It's all part of a general impression one gets from this government. They actually don't have the foggiest idea of what it is that they're doing.
No.
I've never an incoming government as floundering so completely and so unable to justify its existence, explain what it's doing, or to keep any of the promises that it's made. It's really quite peculiar watching it and to be reminded of the general election campaign in late June, in which so many people accepted its claims at face value and voted in such a way that it was bound to come into office. And to recall my period of warning everybody I could find during that time against these people, that they both were not being honest about what they were planning to do, they were not being honest about who they were, and that it was extremely rash to put them into government. And now we have this absurd position where people are signing a petition the government should go. Well, it's not going to.
No.
The law says that if the government wins a majority at general election, then it's got 5 years under the Quinquennial Act before it has to go, and you can't do anything about it unless it loses a vote of confidence in the House of Commons. There isn't a general election. Why are people so irrational about voting? Why are they voting?
I've got a theory about that, and it'll take you back to the days of Tony Blair. I think Tony Blair had a deliberate policy to kind of stun everybody into boredom with economics and with kind of, government policy, and he dragged everything out to such an extent that people sort of lost interest overall in politics and kind of disengaged from it. And I think that's the problem. So people don't expect politicians now to really help them or do anything for them.
There's another theory with a lot of syllables in it called manipulative populism, which basically telling the people what they want to hear. And those of us with long memories can recall the Labour Party in 1997 talking about education. How tough on the causes of crime. And these slogans, which meant absolutely nothing about things they weren't actually going to do, constantly repeated, along with a big fat lie in a Labour broadcast right on the eve of election that the Tories were going to abolish the old age pension. An amazing piece of dishonesty, never properly examined. They did all these things while secretly planning to make the most enormous and radical changes to the country. And indeed, as soon as they felt safe to do so, to debauch the economy with incredibly high levels of spending on their favourite areas of activity, particularly the health service. That's what they were always going to do, not what they said. And this is, as all politicians, which Churchill put it very politely, that politicians campaign in poetry and go on in prose, which meant they tell lies all the time. But lies on the scale that Labour began to adopt in the late 1990s are unprecedented. And this is a government plainly elected on a false prospectus, but there's no law that says that it can't be.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, a lot of people saying to me now, should we not have sort of, legally binding manifestos? Should political parties not be made to actually stand for something and then stick to it? And if not, there should be some kind of sanction.
Well, goodness, they could all be written on a box of matches then, couldn't they? It's difficult to write a manifesto which was able to withstand such a challenge. So yes, but then again, people should be much more. The problem is not with the politicians really, who take advantage of the conditions which they're given by us. We let them do this. We tell them that they can say what they like and then do something else, and there will be no consequences. That's the problem. We should give them consequences. There should be a campaign for a reform of our democracy, in which one of the principal changes should be that on every ballot paper at every election there should be at the top of the ballot a slot for none of the below, and if none of the belows outnumber the actual political parties, then the election should be declared null and void. those people who stood in it should not be allowed to stand again. And new people should be able to, and indeed encouraged to do so. That would be one of the most fundamental things you could do, which would... That
would be at least some improvement on the state of play that we currently have. But just to go back on the Labour Party...
have to think differently about this. They have to think, what can I actually do? And they have to stop going through the ritual of election as if it were some kind of social duty or religious sacrament. If you're presented with 2 manifestos or 3 manifestos, which are plainly full of garbage, which is not going to happen, then abstain. The only thing which gives these people the legitimacy to rule is the fact that millions of people have voted for them. If you just stayed at home and didn't do that, they wouldn't have any legitimacy, and it would cause a crisis in our politics as great as that, as the one before the First World War, which ended the power of the House of Lords, for instance. It can be done, but people have to stop being so willing to vote for people who they don't like.
Right. Well, that is the problem. And I mean, it was a sort of foregone conclusion, this election. It wasn't really a proper election because everybody assumed that Labour would win it, including the media, including all the pundits, and everybody went, well, surely the manner of winning is the only story. But let's talk a bit about some of the other things that seem to be going wrong even as we speak. The Chagos Islands, right? Talking of Tony Blair, he's got Jonathan Pole down in Chagos, supposedly negotiating the final settlement so that Chagos can be handed over to Mauritius. The Mauritians are now saying they don't want it. The Chagos Islanders are saying they don't want to go. The Americans are saying they're probably going to veto it. And it's all going to fall apart, apparently. And you start to ask the question, why did they even bother to do it?
Well, I think there was a deep shame somewhere in the British political system about the way in which the islanders have been treated, which has been atrocious. And I think that perhaps the reason why this measure appealed was that it might have appeared to end that treatment. This is one of those things on which, bizarrely, and his friends have been right for years and everybody else has been wrong. It was shocking the way that they were turned out of their ancestral homes to make way for a military base, and something had to be done in restitution. I have to say I'm not an expert on it, and when this came up, I thought, well, maybe this will end that crisis, but obviously it isn't working. I can't say more, but I don't feel that British possession of the Chagos Islands has been such a triumph that I get terribly exercised about this. They're quite frankly transferring them to Mauritius may not be better, but there's a deeper crisis here over the treatment of the islanders, which is what's always bothered me.
Well, that's what I worry about. I mean, I'm like you. I mean, I remember getting calls from people about the Chagos Islands sort of about 10, 12 years ago when I was doing an overnight show on talkSPORT, and I didn't know much about it then. But certainly it's been a long-running dispute, if you like, from the terms of the treatment of the people that live there. But my problem with it is not so much about the detail of what's happening down there. It's about the fact that they seem to lash out with this kind of very badly thought-through policy, which ends up going completely wrong, rather like, you know, the farmers' inheritance tax, rather like the pensioners' withdrawal of the fuel allowance, and sort of almost everything they do, it's almost as though they haven't thought about what might happen next.
Well, there does seem to be an element of that. It is odd, isn't it, to conclude an agreement which depends upon the goodwill of the United States government very shortly before that government is quite likely to change. Yeah. It might have been sensible to hang around a bit. I had no idea that Donald Trump had any opinions on the Chagos Islands, I have to admit. But there you are. It's possible that he might have. So, but that was odd. And he also cast some light upon the role of Jonathan Powell, who was, of course, an absolutely key part of the Blair takeover. Yes. He and Alistair Campbell were given special powers in the Constitution at that time. And this has never really been rescinded or properly understood as one of the greatest changes in government that took place. But no, the details of it, and you've put me in the terrible position of the person being asked to take an examination at short notice on something about which he knows practically nothing, so I'm going to kind of steer you away from the Chagos Islands. Yes,
fine. Well, let's go towards the blasphemy laws of this country, because yesterday Labour MP Tahir Ali got up in Parliament and said this.
November marks Islamophobia Awareness Month. Last year, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted a resolution condemning the desecration of religious texts, including the Quran, despite opposition from the previous government. Acts of such mindless desecration only serve to fuel division and hatred within our society. Will the Prime Minister commit to introducing measures to prohibit the desecration of all religious texts and the prophets of the Abrahamic religions?
Well, can I agree with him that desecration is awful and I think should be condemned across the House? We are, as I said before, Mr. Speaker, committed to tackling all forms of hatred and division, including, of course, Islamophobia in all of its forms.
There's not really an answer to that, is it, from Starmer? I mean, a lot of people quite annoyed that this idea of a blasphemy law through the back door might be something that we end up seeing coming through Parliament.
Well, we certainly shouldn't have laws restricting freedom of speech, and the relations between religions in a civilized country should be governed fundamentally by good manners. The fact that you're free to say rude and unpleasant things about other people's faces doesn't mean that you should do so. Right. Which seems to me to be the rule, and the Christian churches did for many, many centuries impose blasphemy laws, which they've now pretty much given up trying to do in this country. So I think that that any other religion in this country, respect it as we may, should accept the same conditions. I'm always worried about the term Islamophobia, because Islam, if you aren't, just as Christianity is, and I am a practicing Christian, so I mark this when I say it, is if you're not a believer, it's a set of political, social and philosophical opinions with which you may or may not agree. And you're perfectly entitled, if you don't like it, and people often are, dealing with my Christianity, for instance, to dismiss it in breezy terms. And that can't be classified as a phobia. People can disagree with the precepts of Islam, and they shouldn't face any kind of punishment for doing so. On the other hand, as I say, it is possible for people to use a purported objection to a religion as a cover for racial bigotry. And very much watch out for that. But I don't think that the laws on this subject would help. I think you should take more comfort than you did from Keir Starmer's non-answer. If he'd said, I agree with the Right Honourable Gentleman, there should be laws on this, then I think you'd have more cause to worry. I think that Keir Starmer, who does understand how the law works, at least had the sense not to commit himself on that. So, again, there are awkwardnesses in this subject. There are some people who have made use of Islam as a camouflage for something else, but people, I think, who would like to introduce in this country restrictions on criticism of Islam, which would be dangerous to our free society. And the thoughtful person has to recognise that this controversy is going on and to avoid doing anything stupid.
Right. But the problem is, of course, that whenever Islamophobia is mentioned, or whether Islam is mentioned, there's a sort of a sharp intake of breath from people who you might otherwise think could have an opinion on it, but sort of prefer not to have one for fear of saying the wrong thing. And I think it's time we grew up about all of these kinds of issues and said, look, you know, there are issues in communities around Britain, i.e. there are Muslim communities in Britain which have become, you know, a law unto themselves, which have become sort of very insular, and which have become places where people who are not Muslims are not really very welcome. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that if it happens to be the fact.
Well, no, but then again, what are you intending to achieve by saying it?
Well, by recognising that it's there and it's a problem, and that therefore it needs to be somehow addressed.
Okay, but I say some people might raise these subjects with other motives, as we know. That's
yes, no, I get that. I know that, but that's not my motive. My motive is sure. That we should talk about it because we don't talk about it.
But there is that danger, and that we have to. What we certainly don't want is there's quite enough, thanks to state multiculturalism, of communities living in isolation with their backs turned on each other in separate solitudes and not to each other. There's quite enough of that as it is, and we certainly want to try and do something about restoring a monoculture in this country. Which we can all agree on, in which people don't turn their backs on each other or treat each other as unacceptable in any way. But I'd say so much damage has been done by state multiculturalism and indeed by mass immigration at a level which made it very, very difficult to integrate, that the intelligent person must tread carefully. I mean, I disagree as I've said to people I know who are Muslims, I disagree with some of the precepts of Islam, and I've argued with them about it. And actually, when you do so, in my experience, you can have a civilized exchange. A lot of Muslims in this country would rather this country were more Christian than it is, for instance, and have no particular hostility to the Christian religion, in my experience. But if we want to have these arguments, then we also have to accept this is what has happened. This is the sort of country we're in now. We can't necessarily improve it by just saying this is wrong. You have to have some answer to what the question is.
Yeah, I get that.
That's why people tread carefully, because you see what happens if hostility grows between different.
And that's more of a danger to me than anything, and therefore not talking about it will create a similar situation. Whereas at least if you can create some kind of pathway to what a solution might be, perhaps people will be more understanding of each other.
And blasphemy laws would not help that in any way.
No, I think so. Good to talk to you, Peter Hitchens. Thank you very much indeed. Columnist at the Mail on Sunday.